If you would, open up to Hebrews chapter 1. I'm going to start there here in just a moment. I'm going to start off class with a question that I want you to think about. When you think through the Old Testament, what stories do you think of with angels? Jacob? Be a little more elaborate. All right, Jacob seeing the angels go up and down the ladder, ascending to heaven and descending. All right, Jacob wrestling with the angel. Yeah, I'm with you now. In Daniel and the prophecy about Michael coming and telling about the battles that were going on that he couldn't see because they were spiritual battles. Any others? Before the angels went to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. You think about raining down. Oh, we got some mind readers up here. When you think in terms of Old Testament stories with angels, do you think in terms of power? Do you think in terms of people, whenever they saw them, were very relaxed? Okay, the angel of the Lord at the threshing floor of Araunah, David is scared. If you notice, whenever people encountered angels, it wasn't something immediately comforting. It wasn't something that was soothing. It was usually terrifying. And so as you start to consider more and more of these stories and the power that comes with them, you can probably think of several other stories that are in the recesses of your mind. There's one story in 2 Kings chapter 19 where there's an Assyrian king by the name of Sennacherib, and he's coming through and basically just routing the land and destroying place and nation one after another. And he basically tells Hezekiah, who's the king of Judah in Jerusalem, well, don't think that your God's going to deliver you. All these other gods I've destroyed them. And Hezekiah is afraid. But he takes his fear to God. And in doing so, he asks God for help. And God sends the angel of the Lord, and in one night, the angel of the Lord destroys 185,000 warriors of Assyria. One angel. What does that tell you about the power of an angel? Mighty, strong, strength, terrifying. Now, I want you to think about where we are here in Hebrews. Just look at verse 4 for a moment. In talking about Jesus, having become as much better than the angels, and he has inherited a more excellent name than they. You know those things about angels. What do you recognize about Jesus? He is stronger than them all. Their power pales in comparison when you look at Jesus. You think of an angel of the Lord being able to destroy 185,000 warriors in one night. And you just think and imagine of the power you see in Jesus. What did Jesus have to do to calm the storm? Just speak it. What did he have to do to heal a woman who had been hemorrhaging for 12 years? She just touched the hem of his garment. So what do you see about the immense power of Jesus? Is it more excellent than the angels? It's not even really the same realm, is it? Now, whenever the writers of Hebrews were setting out, they were encountering an audience that was having much difficulty with Jesus. They didn't quite know what to do with him. They had come to some form of faith in him, but not quite a full conviction. You see those same kind of things happen today. This is not rare. If you want to kind of imagine maybe for a moment to think, it's just like children. They've learned the alphabet, but their vocabulary is still really small. In the same way, these people, and you'll understand more and more if you've already been through Hebrews or even going through it again. The book of Hebrews is perhaps the most, this is going to sound bad, the most educatedly written book of the New Testament. It was written to people who had a solid background in the Old Testament, but didn't know how to put the pieces together. And so, as the book of Hebrews unfolds, and we're going to see it today, I'm hoping we can cover 4 or 5 verses. Because each one of these verses quotes 1 or 2 verses from the Old Testament. And the way that they quote them and bring them out is like just touching the tip of the iceberg, expecting you to know all that goes with it whenever he quotes it. You're going to see themes that go through these verses that get quoted. You're going to see Jesus talked about as a son of God. You're going to see him talked about as the king. And then later on, you're going to see him talked about, what about this kingdom that he's over? All those things are just within these couple of verses, because it's like saying to you, do you remember the day that God created man and woman? And you go, they're just saying, well, you know about the whole creation week, right? And so as it goes through, these things are brought up like they're headlines, but there's stories that go with them and concepts to understand that really come straight forward toward the audience of the book of Hebrews. You're having a difficulty putting the puzzle together with who Jesus really is as the Son of God, as the high priest in heaven, as the king who sits on the throne. He says, let me put these things in front of you. Some people were trying to put Jesus in the same realm as he's just an angel, just with some special things. You'll easily come to figure out that is not the case. It is not even close. Now, look at verse 5 and notice the questions that are here. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 5. For to which of the angels did he ever say, you are my son, today I have begotten you? And again, I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. Now, here's the question. I'll ask you, you tell me the answer. To which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son? None. To which of the angels did God ever say, I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me? None. See where the Hebrew writers just put it right in front of you and go, don't try and fit Jesus into being an angel. You'll find it just won't fit. And it's as if he's posing this question of people who have all this Old Testament knowledge, saying, now you just try and think back through all you know. Did God ever refer to an angel as his son? Never. Now, these 2 passages that get quoted, we're going to go back to the Old Testament to read them. And you're going to see there's a bigger picture at hand that the Hebrew writers are really trying to bring about. Now, look back at Psalm 2. Psalm 2. Now, I want you to read through the psalm with me. We're going to kind of read the majority of it here. And I just want you to think, what is God's point in sharing this with the people of Israel? Listen to what he's talking about. He's going to bring up about kings. He's going to bring up about their plans. And then he's going to talk about his son. See what comes to mind. Psalm 2, look at verse 1. Why are the nations in an uproar, and the peoples devising a vain thing? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us tear their fetters apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. Then he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury, saying, but as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will surely tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Now, what's he bringing out? He's in control. Now, as it begins, what are the nations up to? They're in an uproar. He says, what are the peoples devising? Things that don't mean a thing. It's in vain, right? Kind of like a dog chasing its tail. It can run in circles all day long, but it's never going to get it. And if it does, it's just going to hurt. Now, what's here? Nations are in an uproar. The peoples are devising something that's going to come to nothing. Verse 2, what are the kings of the earth trying to do? Establish their position, take their stand. Then he says, and the rulers take counsel together, and what are they trying to do?
They're going to be stronger.
They think they're going to be stronger and make their stand against who? You notice the term God's anointed? You know the word Messiah, what it means? The anointed one. Talking about Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah. He says, rulers take the counsel against the Lord and against His anointed. And what's their response? What are they going to do whenever God tries to move His plan against them? What do they think they're going to do? What are they going to tear off? Nah, you can't handcuff us. We have too much power. Kind of sounds like Sennacherib, doesn't it? He said, I'm going to take Jerusalem down. Who do you think you are? And in one night, the angel comes in, whew, and they go running back to Assyria. They go running back to Nineveh. Here, verse 4, what's the reality? They live in a facade. Here's God. What's He doing while He sits in the heavens? He laughs at their plans. Oh, you think you're so strong. It's like seeing a 2-year-old kid come up to you with a fist and tell you, I'm going to beat the tar out of you. And you go, okay. Sure. You might have all these plans and think that you have the control. You don't have any. Now, let's just make a quick application for us. Do you see the nations in an uproar nowadays? Who are they turned against? The Lord and His anointed. They want to do things God's way? Nope. And so sometimes we get pulled into their rhetoric, don't we? As opposed to realizing, guess who sits on the throne? And what is God doing with all their plans? He laughs at them. And He scoffs at them. Then, verse 5, then He will speak to them in His anger and terrify them in His fury. How's this going to go? Not well for them. He says, but as for me, here's the reality. He says, as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. Now, to the Old Testament readers, who would they have looked at when they saw that? They weren't seeing Jesus. Who would they have thought of? Who was the great king of Israel? David. Maybe it would have been later kings as well. But to them, that's what they would have seen. But now we know what? Who's he really talking about? Jesus. He says, I've installed my king. I've anointed my king. And he sits, he says, upon Zion, my holy mountain. Verse 7, I will surely tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. What do you know about the king? Whose son is he? The Son of God. Here's Jesus, the Son of God. Then verse 8, ask of me and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance. What was the Father's, he says, telling to Jesus, his son? You just ask me and what will I give you? I'll give you all the nations as your inheritance. They're all yours. Did he ever say that to any angel? You ever say, I'm going to set an angel up on my throne? Do you see how people were trying to mix things that had no reason to pull together except for man's imagination and his thinking. Then, he says, "In the very ends of the earth are your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware." Do pots have a chance against a rod of iron? Do these nations have a chance against Jesus, the King? No. So, whenever you see nations in an uproar, what should you be reminded of? If you got a potted plant around the house, look at the vase and just imagine a rod of iron. What's God doing with them and their plans? He just laughs at them. Should we take that to heart and let that affect us? Certainly. So, you get a good picture. Verse 10, "Now therefore, O king, show discernment." Hey, you going to wake up? You going to have any discernment about this? He says, "Take warning, O judges of the earth." Verse 11, what's the response when you see the Son of God as the king? What is it? Look at verse 11. "Worship the Lord with reverence and rejoice with trembling." And usually trembling has an idea of fear, but this is not a trembling out of fear. It's out of a reverence for God. It's a reverential fear, but it's also out of what? Love, rejoicing. We don't live in the time of the days of a king that we live underneath in terms of an earthly realm. Whenever you really enjoyed the king, what would the crowd say whenever the king came around? "Long live the king." Is that the way we see Jesus? Long live the king. Worship him in reverence and in fear and awe, rejoicing that he reigns, the Son of God. Now, verse 12, "Do homage to the Son, that he not become angry and you perish in the way. For his wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are all who take refuge in him." What happens when you take refuge in the King? What do you find? Blessed. There's a blessing from God. That's my refuge. I don't take refuge in these other people who think they have control. I don't take refuge in what's over here or there. I don't take refuge in science. I take refuge in the King, Savior. And whenever you take refuge in him, what does it draw your heart toward? You want to worship. It just can't stop people who revere Jesus from worship. Now, over in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 5, all it told you was, "To which did you say, 'You are my son, today I have begotten you'?" Like I told you. In Hebrews 1, he's just giving you the tip of the iceberg. What's this thing really about? Who is the king? Now, let's take a look at another one. Look over at 2 Samuel chapter 7. We won't spend as much time on this one. 2 Samuel chapter 7, look down at verse 12. David wants to build a temple for God. He's kind of embarrassed. He's built his own house and then finally realizes, I live in a palace and I haven't built anything for the Lord, for his ark to dwell in, the ark of his covenant. 2 Samuel chapter 7, look at verse 12. These are the words that God sent through Nathan, the prophet or the seer. Verse 12, he says, "When your days," talking to David, 2 Samuel 7, verse 12, "When your days are complete and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendant after you who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom." Now, when David heard that, who did he think that God was talking about? His son. Who's going to be the king after David? Solomon. So, just seems fitting. Verse 13. "He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." Who was going to actually build the temple? Solomon and the workers that he was pointed out to use. He says, and I'll establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Who's going to do the establishment? God is. It says God's going to establish. He's going to be the one who establishes it. It's not going to be David, and it's not going to be Solomon. Verse 14. Here's our quote out of Hebrews chapter 1. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. What kind of relationship is there going to be? Intimate one. Whenever you think in terms of David having a close relationship with God, Solomon, whenever his life and he becomes king, how close is he with God? He's a very humble man. Whenever God says, you ask what you want and I'll give it to you. He doesn't ask for lands. He doesn't ask for long life. He asks for discernment, to be able to judge for the sake of God's people. Very humble. And yet God gives him wisdom, far beyond any man of his time. Not the wisest of all men, though, because who was coming? Jesus. Someone wiser than him has come. Notice how it continues here, though. Remember, they're still thinking Solomon whenever these Old Testament people would read through these passages. He says, I will be a father to him, he'll be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and the strokes of the sons of men. Did Solomon ever make any sin and mistake? He sure did. And did it cost him? It sure did. And sure enough, he married so many of these other kings' daughters, and it came at a high price to him because his heart went away from the living God to serve these idols, even to build temples for these others. If you notice it here, you go, well, I thought we were talking about Jesus. What do you mean commits iniquity? You'll see it. Let's keep going. Jesus, no sin in him. Continues, verse 15. But my loving kindness shall not depart from him as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Now when Saul sinned against God, what was God's response to him? I'm going to remove my spirit from you. And what came in upon Saul? An evil spirit. It was so bad that they had to call David to come in and play the harp just to soothe him. And what was Saul's reaction to that? He tried to kill him. Can you imagine trying to kill your own relief? How dumb does that sound? Yet I want you to think about it. Who brings us relief? Is it not Jesus? And are there times where we spurn away from him? Is it not just as foolish? To know what he desires and to turn away from it? Let's continue. He says, but my loving kindness shall not depart from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Verse 16. Your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Who is going to do that? Jesus is going to be the fulfillment of it. Who's going to do it? God is. And does he have the authority to do that? Most certainly. No doubt. Then, he continues a little further. Your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever. Who is God going to use to establish it forever? Jesus. Now, once again, Hebrews chapter 1, I will call you my son. You'll be a son to me, and I'll be your father. What do you see this being all about? A kingdom. A king to sit on the throne. Unlike any angel you have ever read about, because he's not an angel. Did God the Father ever say this to an angel? No. Hebrew writers are making it really clear up front. You want to claim to have some knowledge? Well, you need to think about what you're saying and what you're doing. In seeing Jesus as the King, is it bringing you to worship out of reverence and awe? rejoicing before Him? Or is it bringing you to all the fears that are running rampant through the nations and their kings thinking they have control? Now, come back over to Hebrews chapter 1. So whenever you read through here in verse 5, to which of the angels did He ever say, "You are my son, today I have begotten you"? None. And again, I'll be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. He didn't say that to any of them either. But He certainly did say it about who? Jesus. Beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now, He throws these things together, and He's hitting upon monumental things here. I mean, you realize this is just Hebrews chapter 1. There's still another 12 more chapters after this one to go. Verse 6. And when He again brings the firstborn into the world, firstborn. Now we're not just dealing with son. Now we're dealing with the firstborn Son of God. Now, He says, and when He again brings the firstborn into the world, not into existence. Where's the firstborn coming now? He's coming into the world. Now, I'll just give you a little bit if you want to read it. You can go back to John chapter 1 and read the first 14, 16, 18 verses, and it's all about when the Word became flesh. He says, and when the firstborn came into the world, here's now Jesus comes, the Son of God comes in flesh and blood. What else were the Hebrews struggling with? If you've read forward in chapters 2 and 4, at the end of them, they're going to be saying, well, we didn't really think that Jesus was really like Him. Like He maybe didn't really have the same flesh and blood that we do. But in order for Him to be our Savior, He had to be made just like His brethren in all things. So, way back here, Hebrews chapter 1 is planting seeds that you're going to see grow up and sprout through the book of Hebrews. You're going to see it talk about the firstborn coming into the world. You're going to see it about Jesus being the king. You're going to see it about a kingdom that He reigns upon, about how He reigns over the nations. But they're just planting seeds here in Hebrews chapter 1. So, when you get here at the end of verse 6, He says, and let all the angels of God worship Him. Now, there's other places we could look through Revelation where after Jesus has ascended to the right hand of God, where you see it explicitly say, all angels worshiped Him. But this is dealing with when He was born. So, look back at Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2. Look down at verse 8. We'll read through a few of these verses, but really emphasize verses 13 and 14. Luke chapter 2, verse 8. Jesus has just been born in the previous 7 verses. Verse 8. In the same region there were some shepherds staying out in the fields and keeping watch over their flock by night. And an angel of the Lord suddenly stood before them. And the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terribly frightened. Notice, how do they respond to angels? They're not just frightened, they are terribly frightened, right? Verse 10. But the angel said to them, do not be afraid, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy, which will be for all the people. Now, those shepherds, when they heard all the people, they weren't thinking Gentiles. But that's the reality of what it was. He says, for all the people. He says, for today in the city of David, there has been born for you a Savior who is Christ the Lord. The city of David is what city? No, don't say Jerusalem. Bethlehem. There have been religious books that say Jerusalem in them, but it's not true there either. It says, here it is, Bethlehem, the city of David. He says, for today in the city of David there has been born for you a Savior who is the anointed Christ, the anointed. He says, the Lord, this will be a sign for you. He says, I'm going to give you shepherds a sign. Here's the angel. He says, this will be a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths, and lying in a manger. Now, in all your life, outside of someone who's trying to imitate this, have you ever seen a baby wrapped up in just wraps of cloth and lying in a feeding trough? Ever? He says, this is the sign to you that you found him. Which tells you, when the firstborn came into the world, humble means? Yeah, really humble. Like so humble that we've probably not seen this anywhere else. To think, you lay the child in the manger. If that's where the animals are used to feeding, guess where they're going to naturally go? To think, would you let the donkey or the horse nose the Son of God? Now, this was the sign. Go look. There's a reason there wasn't any room for them at the inn, except out there. It's not because God didn't love them. It was so that there would be a sign. Now, verse 13. And suddenly there appeared with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host praising God and saying. Now, do you see this heavenly host? And if you notice the way it talks about it, he says, just filling the sky. He says, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among men with whom he is pleased. Now, will you find peace, an enduring peace, if you are not pleasing before God? Think about how much money is spent these days on people trying to find peace. They want to buy it in a pill. They want to buy it in a book. They want to buy it in location and where they go. And yet, do they ever find it? Not an enduring peace. Because the only place you're going to find peace is with the Son of God, the King. Now, you notice through here, he says, suddenly there appeared with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host praising God and saying, here's this multitude. Now you just imagine for those shepherds. They'd spent many a night out there in the field. This was not their first time. It's the first time they ever saw that. And the only time they ever saw that. Some of them got curious. Where'd they go? They went to Bethlehem. They wanted to see the King. Now, you get this picture again. He says, whenever he brought his firstborn into the world, guess who noticed? The angels, the heavenly host. He says, and they even showed it to some shepherds. They didn't use the wise scribes of the day. They used the shepherds. Good vocational men. Now, come back over to Hebrews chapter 1. So, verse 5, to which of the angels did he ever say these things? None of them. Verse 6, when he again brings the firstborn into the world, he says, and let all the angels of God worship him. And they did. What's he trying to show you? Angels are down here. He says, Old Testament angels seem like really, really up here. But it's only because God hasn't shown you yet his Son. Now, notice how this continues. Verse 7. Well, all right. Let's see something else first. Look back at Colossians chapter 1. I want to show you something else about the firstborn. Colossians chapter 1, look at verse 15. Oh, I'm going to get carried away here. Verse 13. For he rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Is that peace? Is that peace when you find forgiveness? Oh, yeah. And it only has one source. Let's see, later on in Hebrews, there's going to be a phrase, there's only one name under heaven among which men can be saved. So you're just planting seeds in Hebrews 1. They'll grow later. Verse 15, in talking about his Son, Jesus, he is the image of the invisible God. Remember back in the first couple verses of Hebrews, talking about Jesus? He's the exact representation of God's divine nature. See, here's why. He's the image of the invisible God. Then notice what he says. The firstborn of all creation. The firstborn of it all. Verse 16. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. Who is over every dominion and authority? Jesus. He reigns. His kingdom. Does it matter whether you see it or not? Visible and invisible. Continue, verse 17. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Once again, remember those first 4 verses of Hebrews? By whose power does it hold together? Jesus. There's a reason he's the king. Verse 18. He is also head of the body, the church. And he is the beginning, the firstborn of the dead, so that he himself will come to have first place in everything. Talk about a clean sweep. People get kind of enamored whenever some Olympic athlete goes and they win like 5 or 6 gold medals. If you want to make a parallel of those things, Jesus is not about physical, athletic ability. But can you imagine having some Olympians show up and they entered every single event and they won gold in everything? You think people would know about that? See, he's not about the athletic things. To take first place in everything. Over every king, over every lord, over every principality, power, authority, dominion, power over sin. Complete. He's even head over the church. Do we realize that? Sometimes you get to talk with people and they say, how come we do things in a certain way? I like it. Are we going to give him first place in everything? Or just in the things we want him to have first place in? Because sometimes we want to be. It's not our place. It's not our place at all. Now, he says the firstborn from the dead. Now, when you look through Scripture, is Jesus the firstborn? Is he the first person to ever be raised from the dead? Nope. But he is the firstborn to be raised from the dead, never to die again. There's your set apart. Now, if you see that, later on in the book of Hebrews, I want you to see it. Look over at Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. Look down at verse 23. Man, I keep on wanting to go back further. Verse 21. Hebrews 12:21. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I am full of fear and trembling. That's about Mount Sinai. How did that affect Moses? Was he just blasé about encountering God? No. He's scared to death. Verse 22. But you have come to Mount Zion. Do you remember in Psalm 2? He says, now you have come into the Mount of the Lord. You come to Zion. All right. He says, but you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God. Not an idol, not a dead God. Not one who thinks he reigns but doesn't. He says, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. By the way, Jerusalem in the Hebrew is literally the city of peace. Or as they would say it, the city of Shalom. You have come to the city of peace. Who grants peace? God does. Doesn't come anywhere else. He says, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to the myriads of angels. Myriads means there's so many you can't count them. We would use the word, it's infinity. Verse 23, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who were enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood, which speaks better than the blood of Abel. What do you notice? Is Jesus being given preeminence? Does he have first place in everything? What about among his church? He sure ought to. We need to consider that. And so whenever he hits it here in verse 23, he says, it's even called the church of the firstborn. Can you imagine if we wrote that out on a sign in front? This is the church of the firstborn. Firstborn of what? Firstborn of the dead. Firstborn of all creation. Hebrew writers wanted us to know that. Now, this is way over in chapter 12. But there's seeds being planted way back in chapter 1. So come back to chapter 1. So when you start to take account of these things, so in verse 6 he says, and when he again brings the firstborn into the world, he says, and let all the angels of God worship him. Is it just the angels that should worship him? Hello. It's us. With everything we have. Notice how he continues, verse 7. And of the angels, he says, who makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. Let's see. Do the angels have a role in this? Yeah. But it's certainly not the role of the Son. The S-O-N, Son. Because the Son is the King. The Son is the firstborn of all creation. He is the firstborn of the dead. And he reigns. Now, the people who are reading Hebrews for the first time, is it because they recognize the reign of Jesus that they were having difficulties? Problem was they didn't see Jesus reigning. That's what kept them away from it. And so wouldn't you know it, right here from the get-go, wants to put these things right before them. Jesus is the Son of the living God. He never called any angel a son. Then to make statements, he even goes on, he says, and that all the angels of God worship him. We're not going to read it, but over in Revelation 22, verses 8 and 9, John has seen all these visions, and he sees an angel, and John falls down in front of the angel to worship him. And the angel says, whoa! He doesn't give you the hand movements, but you kind of get that response of, don't do that. We're just servants of those saints and those who are going to inherit salvation. He says, worship is not for us. And you could almost see him. I mean, this book is all about revealing Jesus. He sees that worship is for him. And John knew that. But being overwhelmed, sometimes we get moved in the wrong direction. And so here's this angel saying, don't do that. And too often we get caught up in other things. We think they're worthy of worship. We think they're worthy of adoration. We missed it. We can be thankful to God for a lot of things, in all things. But as you start to see it come into focus, you notice it here, who makes his angels winds and his minister a flame of fire. Here's another one we're not going to read. Acts chapter 7, when Stephen's talking before the Sanhedrin, he refers back to an Old Testament story whenever Moses sees the burning bush. And he talks about how the angel was in the thorny bush. God was using an angel as a messenger to who? to Moses. And in being a messenger, here's Moses who came, and even God tells the angel, it says, you tell him to take off his shoes. Why? Because this is holy. Because this is where God is. It should change us. It shouldn't make us stay the same. And so when you think about here when he says he uses angels, winds, he says he used them in fire. If you want to know a little bit more, you can look back at Psalm 35, you can look at Psalm 104. Wonderful, wonderful things there. Where this gets quoted out of from is Psalm 104. And it's all about how that God has brought these things about. Man tries to contend against God, and the king, he says, you can't do it. You can try, but you'll be failure. And so as you notice what's in line here, he says even use them as ministers of flame of fire. Maybe you think in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Remember, here's the king, Nebuchadnezzar, he's looking into the furnace. Didn't we just throw 3 in there? How come I count 4? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they come out, they don't even smell like fire. How long do you have to be around a campfire before you smell like it? Not long. What does that tell you about power? Their strength. Even using wind. Talks about whenever the Red Sea was divided, God used a strong wind to come out and to divide. Wonder who's being used as a servant there. You just see these things over and over again. Verse 8. But of the Son, he says, now we come to it. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever, and the righteous scepter is the scepter of his kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness above your companions. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. When is it going to stop? Never. Do you ever have to worry about being on this earth and Jesus not reigning? Never. What does that mean for your peace? Anything to fear? Physical death is just a portal to get home. That's right. We're not looking for a deadline. It's forever. Same thing of what Nathan was told to tell David. I'm going to establish your kingdom and your throne. It's going to endure forever. So when he makes these statements, your throne, O King, is forever and ever, and the righteous scepter is the scepter of his kingdom. Who holds the scepter? The King. Jesus, the King. He holds a scepter. I don't know if you remember in the story of Esther. She's called to go in before the king, and she doesn't know what's going to happen. She's prayed, the people have fasted, and she knows that if the king does not lift up his scepter to her, she will be killed, even as the queen. How much power does the scepter show? The scepter doesn't have any power, but what does it show? Authority. What is his scepter all about? Righteousness. Let's see. Is there a chapter in Hebrews that's about righteousness and faith? There sure is. It's Hebrews chapter 11. See, there's seeds here that are being planted, and yet they're just going to spring up in full bloom before the end of the book. So when he makes a statement, the righteous scepter is the scepter of his kingdom. Notice it's his kingdom. If you're going to have a kingdom, you have to have a king. He says, you have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. What does this king stand on? Righteousness I love. If you're going to be a rebel and an outlaw with high-handed rebellion, I hate it. What do you do with foods you hate? Discard, throw away, don't buy. Right? Well, this is beyond food. This is, what if we become a people who want to take Jesus' place as being first in everything? What if we want to supplant what He wants? What does that make us? Let's make an easy application. What do you know Jesus says to wives? Submission. What if I want to supplant that? What am I holding to? Is it righteousness? Or is it lawlessness? He says, what about people who decide we want to go against the authority of Jesus? Husbands can do the same thing. Don't want to sacrifice for their wives. Who are they standing face to face against? Jesus. As a wife, what can you know? Do you stand alone? Or does the king and his scepter stand with you if you'll walk by what's righteous? Boy, that shouldn't scare you. It should make us want to hold to him with everything we have, even if he's wrong. Not Jesus. He's not wrong. But that husband might be. To make sure we hold to Jesus first. So, he says, you have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. Therefore, God, your God has, look at the word he uses, anointed you. What was he anointed with? Just read the rest of the verse. The oil of gladness above your companions. Is Jesus like anybody else? He's above every man. He's above every angel. He's above every lord. He's above every king. He's above every ruler, every authority, every dominion, every power. Are we getting the picture? King of kings. And he reigns. And we best not ever forget it. And not ever feel like we have to be intimidated. Because we stand with the King in righteousness, by faith, through his working. There's a lot more you can read if you want to go back to Psalm 45. First 9 verses really point these things out. Once again, just planting seeds. You'll see them grow. And Lord willing, next week, Kason will be back with you.